All right, so time for UVs. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to export each piece. I tend to put stuff into the data directory of my project when I'm going to do UVs. So I'm just exporting each piece that needs to have its UVs laid out, and then launching UVLayout. And then UVLayout, basically, you just need to click on the edges that you want your seams to be, and then split and unwrap. Pretty simple. So laying out the UVs for this guy, I think took me about 40 minutes, which if I did it in Maya would have taken way longer than that and been really mind-numbing. So UVLayout is rad. So as you can see, it's very simple. Really, the only thing you need to do as far as brain power goes is figure out where you want your seams to be. And that just requires, a little bit of tweaking to put your seams in places that ideally are hidden if possible. So if you can hide your seams, then that's always nice, because then when you're texturing in Photoshop or body paint or whatever, things like, texturing in body paint or ZBrush is less of an issue because you don't have to worry about your seams. You can paint right over them. But when you're texturing in Photoshop, which I do a lot of, it's nice to have your seams be in places that are hidden, because then otherwise you'll have to take those textures you make in Photoshop into something like body paint to fix the seams. So can't get around having seams. It's just a decision of where to put them. So here we have the fingernail. UVLayout color codes when you unwrap. And so the color coding green is ideal. Something that's blue means it's getting too much UV space, and something that's red is getting too little. It does it based on world space. The idea with UVLayout is that it unwraps your meshes so that you can put a texture on it and not see the texture stretch anywhere. And so the way it relaxes things is based on trying to relax it based on the world space relation of the faces to each other, in a way that's far superior to relaxing in Maya. So a little bit of red in places is okay, just because in the end I'm not necessarily going to put just one texture map across the whole thing. I might start with a base map that goes across the whole thing, but then I'm still going to tweak it and tune it. So so I might end up with areas that are red, but the main thing that's important is that I don't have overlapping UVs. Like, overlapping UVs is a problem that'll cause ZBrush to freeze or crash and all sorts of problems. So you definitely want to make sure they don't overlap. But if I have an area that's a little bit reddish or bluish, I don't care about that so much. So I can preview in UVLayout how a texture would unwrap. The thing with UVLayout obviously is, you can look at the UI for it. You can see it's very, 80s, early 90s sort of IRIX software. It's kind of old school looking. It's all hotkey based. There's a bunch of buttons here, but most of the tools I'm using in here are hotkeys that are not don't have buttons. So you just have to read the README that comes with UVLayout to learn what those hotkeys are. I'm not going to get into obviously all that's telling you what all that stuff is. So I mean, there's not that many that you need to learn. Learning UVLayout is probably something that really shouldn't take you more than an hour. But the $200 that it costs will save you so many hours of work that if you value your time, $200 is nothing. Because when I hear people say like, oh, well, I already have Maya and Maya does UVs, so why should I spend the money on UVLayout? It's like, are you crazy? I mean, if UVLayout was $2,000, I would have bought it. That's how serious of a time savings I find it to be. I mean, you have to remember that programs used to be so much more expensive than they are now. I mean, when Maya came out, it was $50,000. Power Animator before Maya was $75,000 for one seat. you know? So the fact that you have programs like Maya now for 2 grand or UVLayout for 200 or 300, whatever it is, it's really, really so much more affordable than things used to be. So you can see my whole job inside here in UVLayout is just figuring out where to put seams and then jumping into the UV window and just hitting Shift F, which then basically unwraps it. And it goes pretty quick. So we're seeing about 40 minutes of stuff in about 10. So it's I think we're at 4 speed or something like that. So it takes, the thing with UV or laying out your UVs is you just have to get used to, general practices as to where to put seams and stuff like that, and good ways to split it like a cylinder so that it unwraps correctly. As once you know that, it's pretty simple. Sometimes I'll unwrap it one way and decide that maybe I could do it another way, so I'll put the seam somewhere else. So you'll see, I've done that a couple times in here already. Another nice thing with UVLayout is it also packs the UV shells for you. So you can see it packs them into 0 and 1 in a nice and clean way. I just cut that one up to make it have a little more green, and then change my mind, deciding that it doesn't really matter. And then I just save them out, just doing one at a time. Now we have this guy. Also, a nice thing with UVLayout is it has symmetry. So you only have to do one half and it automatically does the other half. Simple stuff like that is a big deal. Unwrapping the arm, getting a little bit of red at that nub. So I could always, cut that nub off into another shell to have less red. But then in the end, as long as they're not overlapping, I'll still be able to texture it without a problem. So the funny thing is that because of this program, I actually enjoy doing UVs now. Never thought that would happen. Because again, it's one of those things like when I was, painting the white background on my sketches earlier that I said was like, a simple Zen thing to do. That's how I see doing this now. It's like after working on the base mesh where, I'm doing a bit of thinking, puzzle solving. Once I get into this program, it's kind of like relaxing time for an hour. But still strangely satisfying when you're done. So you can see for the head there, it's taken me a couple stabs to figure out the best seam placement. But the nice thing is that it's so simple to try it one way, try and flatten it, see if the flatten works. If not, try it another way. And then I'm seeing that seam go up the front of the face. But that's really not that big of a deal. But then I decided, oh, well, maybe I can cut this a little bit differently. But in the end, having a little bit of a seam at the front there seemed like a good compromise. And then packing it. And I'm just scooting things around so that pieces that relate to each other are next to each other. And then exporting. And then now in Maya, I just grouped the un-UV'd stuff together and put it on a layer that I could hide. I'm just naming all the components. And then now I'm importing the ones that I laid out the UVs for. I only did the finger once because since I know that my finger is just a copy, the small finger is a copy of the original that's just scaled. No reason to lay out the finger 2 times. And then now renaming all of those, just trying to be clean. Hopefully you can tell by now that I'm a very anal person when it comes to everything. Well, not everything. Maya stuff. I just figure that, the big thing that I see with students is that they rush or they skip things or they're not anal enough and then they hit all sorts of problems. And like students always have all these like bugs and problems and weird things in Maya or ZBrush or whatever that I haven't encountered. And in the end, those problems that I see people have at the school tend to just come from rushing. You know, you didn't merge your vertices correctly, or you have overlapping UVs, or these little things that just are a big pain in the butt to fix later. And so I learned my lesson with all of that, and decided that just take your time. So I imported the geometry. Let me pause for a second. Imported all the geometry with the UVs. You can see I have the dude with no UVs, the dude with UVs. I have a layer for each. And then for the geometry that has the UVs, I made a shader, just a simple blend shader in Maya. And I have this UV map that I got years ago from Sean Mills. And I just use that. So I put that on the shader, assign it to geometry, so I can just make sure that I've got the correct geometry in here. So I can see how that UV map is wrapping around the meshes, so I can see everything is good. And then I'm going to do another turntable so that I can then present what the UV layout is. As a modeler, especially if you're working somewhere where you're working with other people who are going to be doing texturing, it's nice to show, how you've laid out the UVs, or regardless who else might be texturing. It's just another, again, issue of presentation. Just being able to, it only takes me a few minutes to set up this turntable. And, oh, that was the end of the video, so let's get back to here. Let me find that turntable so I can show you that real quick. So just give me 1 second as I'm looking for it. And I'm looking for it on a window you can't see. There it is. There we go. So there's the turntable of our UVs. And so we've got our seams in optimum places. So most of the seams I put, on the inside back of the arms or the kickstands, or, just you try and put them in places that are not going to be seen often. And so, it's going to be seen at some point in some pose for the character, but the more I can hide them, the less I have to worry about them as I'm texturing something. And also, when I make my QuickTimes, by the way, for something like a turntable, after I've exported the QuickTime from After Effects, I then open it up in QuickTime, and then I turn on loop, and then I save the QuickTime so that whoever gets this after me, whoever I deliver this to, if they open it in QuickTime and hit play, it automatically loops, just because there are people out there that don't know that you can turn on loop, and they then would continue to click the play button over and over again. So it's just nice convenience. And then also I save this out not only with loop on, but also at half size. So if we go up to normal size, this one is 720p, meaning 1280 by 720. And there we have it. So that wraps up UVs. And so with our, at this point, we've come up with an idea. We've taken a bunch of stabs at designing it, picked a design, did an animation test, refined the design, modeled a base mesh to match the design as accurately as we could, laid out the UVs, and now we're ready for ZBrush at this point. And so the model that we have matches the design, but is obviously completely lacking our sort of secondary details. We have our primary forms locked down. We have to now go into ZBrush to resolve the secondary form, the musculature and general detailing of it. We're not going to worry so much about the sort of, what you might refer to as tertiary form, meaning things like skin pores and tiny, tiny details, as those are things that really don't matter when you're doing this level of creature development at this point, where stuff you're really focusing on things that you're going to see from like far away or mid level, but like up close of something is less important. And so that's stuff for a final shot. You know, what the actual skin pores look like on the elbow um, is something that in an art department or doing creature development, when it's that's less important than just getting the general forms in there. So I'm not going to worry too much when we get into ZBrush about those things, but I definitely need to get this guy to look more presentable, because this just gives us a general idea, but still doesn't look, uh, there's still too much unresolved in this model, and that's where ZBrush becomes very, very useful, especially for fine tuning the overall forms. Because while we know this guy perfectly matches the design from the side view, issues of what he looks like from the front, the top, three-quarter, ZBrush is really going to be the best thing to take our base mesh and resolve the form from that perspective. So let's move on.